Hello everyone, Ogre27Kane here today, and we're going to do a review of Atelier Ryza, Darkness in the Secret Hideout for Nintendo's Switch. Let's do an overview, talk about what this game is, what to expect. This game is a JRPG, but it's not a traditional turn-based JRPG. It's actually a mixture of real-time and strategic elements. It's pretty interesting, it's unlike anything I've ever played before. At first, I thought the story was going to be real kiddie and childlike, but I'm pleasantly surprised. It's actually deep and pretty engaging. Although starting fairly simple, the game definitely expands its narrative and increases in scope as it goes. It starts out as just a small crafting game, but turns into so much more. This has probably the most impressive crafting system I've ever seen in a video game. That being said, let's get into our first category. The gameplay. So the general gameplay loop starts out with you as a young girl in a village who's doing almost a coming-of-age story. She meets up with a mysterious alchemist from outside of her village and begins to learn the craft. In doing so, it takes her down a really interesting journey where she meets all kinds of interesting friends and foes and goes to all kinds of different places. The general loop sees you starting out in a town, getting information about said quest, and then going out and doing it. Some quests are simply dialogue and video, cutscenes if you will, and some quests are combat and interactions and exploration. The cool thing about this game is that with a well-written story, it makes it so as these interchange, you kinda get excited to see what you'll be treated to next. It's essentially a 3D action adventure. I want to use the term open world, but it's not really. There are loading scenes between each zone and area, even though the game lets you freely explore between them, unless something is locked out to a specific area or story or quest moment. I'm currently about 30 hours into the game, and from what I understand, there's a long way to go. I've seen people putting hundreds of hours into the alchemy system on this game. So it's got a pretty impressive breadth of things to do. Well, with gameplay out of the way, let's hit the next category, the story. And the story in this game is actually really interesting. I was pleasantly surprised. At first I expected something childish, something kiddie, and something I wasn't going to be interested in. I kind of purchased this game just knowing that it was going to be a rare game and not easy to find. Lo and behold, I was extremely happy to find out that this game is really deep and the story is most of that depth. Ryza is an interesting character, and her supporting cast are all interesting as well. Lent has turned into one of my favorite characters of all time. The story starts out very simple. You're just a young girl trying to find her way in the world. When you meet some mysterious alchemists, everything changes. As Ryza shows how much courage she has, she goes off into the world and explores things that many of the adults in her world are afraid of. This allows her not only to help her village, but to live her dream of exploring the world. Now, as her story expands, the characters around her develop as well. You see them go from being selfish to understanding why they were wrong, and to having their own personal growth. Claudia is pretty impressive. She's kind of a recluse who ends up changing the minds of her fellow compatriots about having compassion towards those around her. Kind of a deep thing. Well, I'm not going to ruin too much more about the story, so let's touch on graphics and animations now. Although not running at the true 60 FPS that the PS4 and PS5 versions of this game do, the game still looks absolutely gorgeous. I'm super impressed that this studio, who from what I understand is not very big, was able to do everything as well as they did. There are no real frame rate drops or glitches. There's nothing like that in the world. The enemies all react positively. Hit detection and collision detection are on. And most importantly, the game's graphics are vibrant and colorful. The art in this game is phenomenal. They definitely spent a lot of time on this, and they made all of the animations tied to that art impactful. The characters actually look real. And what I mean by real is true to the artist's form. What the artist is going for. The characters all look really good and are proportional to each other, and thank God there is no chibi in this game. although having a lot of the traditional Japanese tropes, the weird poses and stuff like that, none of that bothered me and none of it was over the top. It was all fairly relative to what you were doing in the game. Well, next up, let's talk about a really interesting category in this game, the combat. The battle system in this game is unlike anything I think I've ever played. It has almost a real-time aspect to it. As you can see on the side, there's a gauge, and that gauge shows you at what turn order your characters are facing. The interesting part about this is, much like Grandia, you can manipulate that turn order and you can break and stun enemies. You can also utilize special attacks out of order, which can give you really powerful effects. It's really hard to show. You almost have to play the game to understand it. One of the cool things about this game is it took me about 5 hours to understand what I was even doing, and by the time I did, I got absolutely addicted. Not only that, but the combat system seems to keep expanding. I keep learning little things as I go, such as the little dialogue that's yelled out by your fellow compatriots. If you follow their orders, they'll help you do another special attack, so there's another layer on top of that. You can slow things down, but you really don't want to after you start going. The game really makes you just keep everything fast-paced, and I love that. I really enjoy it. Let's talk about some controls and audio now. The controls in this game are pretty standard fare for a 3D action-adventure game, and they do give you a lot of options if you need to invert axis or change sensitivity. There's no complaints here, and I think they do well for what they were trying. As far as the audio goes, it's pretty top-notch. Everything fits well, it's very upbeat, and it's got a happy tone to it. The game will really encourage you to play it, and it makes you feel good while you're playing it. So, with all being said, let's do a conclusion now. Do I think this game is a must-play? I do if you're an RPG lover. The game definitely lends itself to those who have played before. If this isn't your style of game, and you don't have the patience to learn it, then maybe it's not for you. For me, on the other hand, though, I really enjoyed it. It made me buy the second one, and I'm looking forward to the third one releasing here soon. There's not much more I can say other than to encourage you to buy this game while it's still cheap enough to afford. It will be rare, even though it's a reprint. Well, thank you for watching today's video. It was an absolute blast to make. I upload every Monday, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day. This is Ogre 27 Kane, signing out.